So the next stage we want to look at then is both design and delivery, which is part of the mobilization phase within 5D. And this is, for some people, this is the bit that they love. They love to get into the detail. They love to get into the planning. For some people, they really, really hate it. They don't like to get into that level of detail. And I would say, don't worry about that, because this is where team is so important. Within your team, it's about utilizing the skills that are within your team. Who are the strategic people in your team who love to get into those details, and how can you work with those people? And it's about beginning to think about what is it that we're actually trying to achieve with our dreams? What difference is it that we really want to make? And what are the objectives and the aims of what we're trying to achieve? I think a really helpful thing to think about is, when we're thinking about aims, is to bring it down to the individual people and to have a people-centered, not a project-centered approach. Now, what I mean by that is, as a local church here in Lincoln, we were a typical church that would have lots of different projects running. You know, we love the idea of that. Let's run that project. Let's connect with CAP, and we're going to have this, and we're going to connect with Trussell Trust, and we're going to have this, and we have almost like this portfolio of different projects. And each project would have its list of objectives and aims. With this project, it's trying to help X number of people out of debt per year. With this project, it's about helping X number of young people to stay in school, etc. And we would hope that people would gravitate to those projects so that we could achieve those project objectives. But the reality is, of course, is that having projects at the center and people gravitating towards projects, we forget that an individual person isn't just a food bank user or a young parent. They're an individual with their own journey, their own lives. And it's not about people gravitating towards projects. It's thinking about, let's put that person at the center of what we do. And what is that person's own objectives? And how do the projects, actually, and services gravitate around the person? And having a person-centered approach to what we do. And all this stuff around here is amazing, but it only exists to support the individual, doesn't it? You know, a CAP client could be the same person as a food bank user who also needs a job club, who also needs support with learning English. And let's think about a person's objectives over our individual project objectives. I think that's really helpful to remember, because that's what holistic support is all about. It's thinking about an individual with their whole life and doing that whole journey with them. So then when we go in through that design, it's about how do we create a really good action plan to validate and back up our dreams. So on your tables, there's a couple of action plans printed out. There's like a stapled together. I haven't printed out the website, sharejesusinternational.com/5D. You can download this for free on there, and you can use this. But just to talk through this, what we've designed here is what we think is quite a helpful guide to creating an action plan for your work, which encourages you to think about all the different elements that you need when thinking about designing a service or designing a project or whatever you want to call it. And as you can see from this, it does feel quite detailed, and that's why I think it's important to think about who are the people who love the detail and who's on your team to help with that. But the idea of this is designed to be a helpful guide to encourage you to think through some of those practical details that's going to help you in the long-term design of your project. So it includes things like thinking through what actually is our aims. What is our objectives? What are we trying to achieve? How is it supporting individuals and what they are trying to achieve? It guides you through thinking about what are the actual, how do we prove the need of our project? So it gives you a chance of all that learning that you've done through the discovery stage. Can we just put that all down on paper to kind of build this evidence base for the need for what it is that we want to do? How can we take that learning, those conversations that we've had, and put those down as evidence for what we want to do? Section 3, trying to understand what are the resources that we're going to need. Thinking first of all, well, what assets do we already have? What is already in our hand? But going beyond that and thinking, well, actually, there might be a case where we need to to bring in new resource or develop new assets. And thinking through that process of what is it that we have, what is it that we need. We don't always like to talk about it, but budgets are real things. What budget do we need in order to make this work? What financial resource, and where might we get that from? It's then thinking through a project timeline. Where are we today? Where do we want to be? What are all the steps we're going to need to take between now and project launch? What are all the things we're going to need to do to prepare? Who do we need to involve in that process? And it gives you that framework of how to start to create some kind of project timeline. Risk analysis. What risks are there? What are the things that might throw us off track? What are things that we need to be aware of that might be a risk to ourselves or the people that we want to help? The last thing we want to do is create something that just causes hurt or harm. So how can we be prepared and think about how we avoid or manage those risks? Section 6, stakeholder analysis. Who else needs to be involved? Who else do we need to talk to? Who else is involved in the design of this? Do they understand what it is that we're trying to achieve? What are their views? How are we going to connect with other people? Who are we going to partner with? Do we have to do this on our own? Are there others that we can share this journey with? Section 7, how do we then go on to actually monitor, are we actually achieving what we want that we set out to achieve? Sometimes we have great ideas for our services and our projects. These are what we're going to achieve, but how do we evidence that we actually have achieved those things so we know if we're doing the right thing? Are there things we need to stop doing because they're not really helping us to achieve our vision? Evaluating, do we know that this is making a difference? How do we know that this is making a difference? And who is supporting our plans? Who is supporting our ideas? So this is designed really as a helpful guide which helps you through that process of designing your work in such a way that helps you think about all the different levels of detail, who needs to be involved, and what resources might we need. So like I said, it's a free resource on the website, and you can download that and use that. Some of you might look at this and think, I recognise some of this because, if you've ever had to do funding applications before and you need to put this in place. But those things are there for a reason because it helps us just really understand that we have thought through our plans and we've really tested them out well. So a couple of questions for us to discuss in our groups. One is, when we create something like this, when we create an action plan, who are we wanting to read this? Who is this for? Who are we presenting this to? And so my first question to discuss in your group is, who are the decision makers, or who should the decision makers be who would need to receive this? Is it clear in your place who you want to be the decision makers for anything that you as a church or a group of people might set out to do? So have a quick think about that question. Who are or who should be the decision makers for anything that you start or begin to do in your church or location? Okay, so probably a very interesting discussion, isn't it, to have? Who are the decision makers? And it's probably different from place to place or from church to church. The question is, who are the decision makers or who should the decision makers be? So Andy's got a microphone. It'd be great just to hear maybe some answers, some things that you discussed on your tables is about, who it is that you kind of perceive or recognize to be decision makers or who should be decision makers for things that you might be doing as a church. So would anyone like to offer an answer to that question? Anyone like to have a go? Great, down here.
Thank you. One of the things we said was a key group that should be on the decision-making group are those impacted by any ministry that you're going to be setting up. So you don't do it to them, you do it with them.
Excellent, thank you. Absolutely brilliant answer, thank you. Any other answers? Yeah. Oh.
We were just partly reflecting on kind of the relationship between stakeholders and decision makers, and actually decision makers being one of the stakeholders in the mix and not kind of being in authority over the top, but being part of a consortium that works together towards the objective.
Yeah, that's amazing. Really good thought. Any other answers? Any other ideas? Maybe one more. Oh, behind you, Andy.
I think one of the things that struck me is if we've done our research properly, if we've done our consultation properly, if we've done our asking questions properly, then the people who need to be involved in saying, yeah, we think this is a good plan, will already have that discussion. Won't be taking anybody who's surprised at it coming.
Absolutely. Perfect. That's 3 absolutely brilliant answers. Really, really good. Yeah, it's about how those people who've been on that journey with us are involved in that process, not just in the design, but in the decisions as well. And also thinking about, if we from a church context as well, how are we bringing our church leaders on this journey as well, so that we're like a sub-task group that runs away with some ideas, but that we bring our whole church and our church leadership on that journey with us. In Lincoln, as I mentioned, I'm the chief exec of the charity Acts Trust, which is connected to Alive Church. We're a separate charity in the sense that we've got our own charity number, we've got a separate board of trustees, and we have to work really hard to make sure that we carry on working at the same pace as the church. What we don't want to do is run away with these great ideas and great opportunities, and we've left the church behind us, so that down the line, nobody can recognize at all the connection to church. And I've seen it time and time again, some really amazing charities, but you don't remember that their origins were a local church because they've just run away with a vision and left the church behind. How do we make sure that we take the church on the journey with us? The church leaders, the church congregation are on it. And sometimes that means we have to be mindful of the pace of change and the pace of what we do, but it's so important. Yeah.
And can you share how you did that in Lincoln, how you made sure that the church families come with you on the journey that's happened?
Absolutely. I think there's a number of things, and there's not one answer that makes that work. And Joy will back me up on this. Joy is one of the pastors of the church. Joy is also the chair of the charity. And we've made it, one of the things we did is made sure that there is, in our board of trustees, there's a role called the member of the board, whose sole purpose is to ensure that whatever we do as a charity is aligned with the vision of the church. So we don't create this sort of para-vision or para-mission, but it's owned by, and almost Joy's role as the member and on the board is to challenge us. Is this well communicated to the church? Are the church involved with this? And it's also about us making sure that we're communicating really well to the church congregations about what's happening and having their opportunity to be involved in, not just in volunteering, but involved in sort of shaping and designing. So we can have a conversation after if you like. There's lots of different ways, but it's so important that you take your church and your community on that journey with you. My last question is, how can you ensure that the ownership of the design of any work stays within the community? So it's quite a similar question to what we've discussed, but how do you ensure that ownership stays within the community and doesn't run away? What's your thoughts? What's your experiences? How do you ensure the ownership of the design of your work stays within your community? Have a go at that question.
It won't be about what ideas might be around something and then what somebody
Okay, we'd like to finish that conversation.
Yeah, it's one to balance that.
So the question is very much about how do we ensure that the ownership of any design that we have does stay within our community. So it'd be great to hear some of your ideas, some of your views. So who would like to share what you've discussed in your group? Yeah, Ben, down here.
We didn't actually speak about it as a table, but I think it's something that's on my heart, but it was related to what Joy was saying earlier about her trip to Cambodia and Tier Fund's approach in terms of going to a place and they were talking about the trafficking in Cambodia and making people realise that they're created by a creative God and that we should foster that in people and make them realise that they are made in the image of God and then they will be able to, within their own communities, understand what it is that they need to do to get out of certain things that we might address as issues in the community. And so when you build up and empower a local community, then they have ownership over it, and then they can take the actions that are needed to do that. So
that's great, because actually that process of education led to, well, now that we know this, what can we do about this?
Yeah.
You know, it's not a prescribed, right, you must do A, B, and C, and then this will happen. It's actually like, let us inform you and teach you and train you. And then people are like, now that we have this knowledge, what are we going to do about it? And they have that ownership, don't they?
And then what Joy was saying about, it was actually the local communities teaching the West. So like, what can local communities teach us as a church, and how can we learn from them?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else like to share? Yeah.
I feel like I've talked a lot, but I'll have another go. We talked about, in our experiences as a church, we have seen quite a large charity birthed out of the church historically, which has then gone to a point where, and the conversation was around, at what point is it okay, or does it feel that it's the right thing that a charity that's come out of you then goes on to do other stuff, which is completely not connected to what the original mission was, which is to share the gospel. And we kind of, the conversation was really interesting, because the organization that has gone on is still doing some incredible stuff. Now, it might not be doing it in the name of Jesus, but it is changing lives, and it is seeing, people's lives massively affected, probably on a scale that would not have been possible if it had stayed within the confines of the church organization. And it's about how you how do you juxtapose yourself within that, of like, are we compromising the mission of spreading the gospel and the king? I think somebody mentioned we're here to build kingdom. And I think it's that idea of, well, what does kingdom look like? What does success look like in that concept? And being able to have, that's where it's really important to take people on the journey with you. Because then what does success look like in that context?
Yeah.
And for us, I think it's like, this is the journey we're all continuously on, because you may well have a project that becomes really successful. Yeah. And actually then outgrows, and what do you do in that situation? Yeah. I kind of say that as part of a conversation, but also like a question. How do you move past that, in that moment?
It's a great question, isn't it? And I suppose, in a sense, it's having the graciousness within ourselves to release when things need to be released, and to bless people who we need to bless, and actually say, we can see that what you're doing is tremendous, and we want to, in a sense, release you and bless you and support you, and we're with you. And part of that is it so important that we have our own brand, all this stuff ourselves? Does that matter? If what's happening is building kingdom, does it matter whose name is on this? Actually, the fact that it's been birthed, like a parent to a child, it's been birthed from us, and we release that and we're blessing that, is a tremendous thing in itself, isn't it? So yeah, you're right. There's these sort of multiple layers to this, and it's not always one answer for everything, is it? But yeah, that's very good. A really good point you've raised there. Great. Yes.
A very simplistic answer to the question was involvement, engagement and involvement in projects. But what came to mind for me was I don't know to what extent we fully understand or have embraced the idea of ABCD, because implicit within ABC are notions of accountability, ownership, engagement, all those things. And if you run something that's being driven by the passions and needs of the people you're listening to, those people might not necessarily share your values, particularly your religious values. And so where do you move from then what is implicitly a paternalistic model of church, i.e. we are here to help, which is missional, to an ABCD position, which is like, actually we're here to empower. And to what extent does empowering then become problematic, potentially and threatening to a paternalistic model of church?
That's a question, isn't it?
That's a question.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think ultimately this is where whatever we do has to start with relationship, and it has to start with recognizing that we're journeying together, and also recognizing that I am here to learn on this journey as much as I'm trying to encourage my community to learn. Am I prepared to be challenged in my viewpoints as much as I'm trying to challenge the points of others? And so sometimes that might actually I'm changing my views on this because of what I'm hearing. But also it is about relationship. And so when you do this in relationship, it's about you having an opportunity to say, well, these are the values that are really important to us. And if we're going to run with this as well, if we're going to do this, these are things that are kind of core values to us, that we want to stick to these principles. And you can write those values together, you can discuss together, but ultimately, for you as a church, it's saying these are things that are really core, that we are sort of unshakable values for us that we want to stick to. And if that's communicated through relationship rather than imposed in an authoritative way, then you're more likely to have success on that journey than if you just said, this is the way it's got to be. Get in line or it's not going to happen. Yeah.
We had a really helpful picture that came out of a prophetic prayer meeting last week, and that is quite simple, I think could be quite helpful. And that is, it's no longer about one person preparing a meal for everybody else to consume. We need to make it a bring and share.
Yeah, nice. That's good. Yeah. It's not one person preparing the meal, it's bring and share. Nice. Great. Okay. I think we'll finish from there. So I'm going to hand back to Andy, and then we've got one more story, and then we'll close our day together. So over to you, Andy. Thank you.
So we're in this final kind of D now about delivery, and the final segment is about monitoring and evaluation, the stuff we all love. So monitoring is basically simply about measuring the processes that we have in place, and evaluation is working out, is what we are doing effective? I'm just going to give you two very quick models we talk about more in the book, just a quick overview. The first one down here on the next slide is called a distance travelled wheel. That often we look at hard outcomes. We might look at how many packages of food we give away in a week or a year. We might look at how many people get jobs, having been through our kind of job program. And we can measure those hard stats quite easily. But measuring the soft outcomes can be much more difficult. So the distance travelled wheel is a really helpful way of monitoring what is happening in people's lives. Where you have this wheel here, and you might put, for example, one of those areas could be, I am kind of how confident you feel in parenting, for example. And if you're doing a parenting course with some parents, they might start off quite low, week one, but by the end of the course, they might be out near the outskirts where they've actually become much more confident in how they're doing that. This idea of capturing some soft outcomes, where again, of monitoring what you're doing, checking on progress and seeing how things are moving forwards. So that's the first thing about monitoring. And the second thing is about evaluating. The next slide down. Because it's a really simple thing, you probably heard about this before, the SWOT analysis, the idea of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. That actually is important as we get the information, as we measure the processes, we then begin to evaluate it. And when you evaluate and how often you evaluate and who you evaluate with are really important questions. But really to have some stats, the hard data and the soft outcome data really gives you some kind of core stuff to really wrestle through. To ask the question, are we making a difference? Looking back into that initial plan, what were our aims? And are we actually making a difference with the aims we set out originally? So who are the stakeholders? How are you going to meet with them? The resource unpacks all those different elements. And then working out for the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats is a really kind of helpful way to explore those different aspects of what you're doing and the difference that you're making. And when you evaluate, it's really important to work out what is the output, what is the outcome having evaluated, what needs to be tweaked and changed, what needs to be stayed the same. And if we're going to tweak and change things, how do we communicate that and move that forwards as well? So monitoring and evaluation, often it's the kind of boring side of things, but it is a really important side of things. To monitor what the progress is happening generally and to evaluate, are we being effective in what we've set out to do? The final slide is just these 5D's again. And we had a bit of a kind of controversy with Steve Botham saying we should have a 6th D. We were like, no, 5's enough. But Steve said, no, you should have a 6th being develop. Because I guess the whole thing is that projects do develop, things develop over time. I set up a community festival about 12 years ago in our community in London, working with a whole bunch of different people in the community. And it went so well that on the back of that, the council said, you run this great kind of community festival. Could you also help us run a festival for turning on the lights at Christmas time? I'm like, well, yeah, sure. And from there, various other opportunities kept growing out of that opportunity and became like a massive amount more we could do. The idea that things do develop. But I think rather than having a 6D, we'd encourage people to go back around the previous 4Ds. That as we're evaluating, as we're thinking through the process we're making, as things arise, as more opportunities, we work again through actually, what is our role? What is our role? Actually discovering afresh, actually what is happening in this moment? What has changed in our culture, in our community over this past amount of time? Dreaming afresh what could be done differently. So rather than having a 6D, we went in the end for having 5Ds, but the idea that you keep working around these. We never fully get there and say, now we have finished and everything is done for the rest of our lives until Jesus returns. But instead, actually, we're going to continue on this journey of exploring and being open to what God has in store next.